Hello show, I'm your host Oriana Fox. We have an exciting show for you today, dealing with a theme that's very close to my heart. And we have 3 fascinating guests who all feel that performance can change your life for the better. And we're going to hear more about that later, but I just want to start by telling you a little bit more about why the therapeutic potential of performance is so important to me. I'm lucky to have come from a family that's conversant in feelings. My mother is a psychotherapist and my father is a child psychologist. I've also had my fair share of therapy. The reason I started to go to therapy was because when I was a teenager, I got caught drinking at my junior high school dance. And while my father didn't think the behavior was so bad, he thought that the fact that I got caught was a cry for help. So I was offered psychoanalysis. And I took it up because I wanted to know what my dreams meant. And I was at that age where it was no longer, I felt a little bit embarrassed to tell my parents what my dreams were. So I went and I found out there was a lot more to it than that. And I did learn a lot about myself through that process. But thinking back on it, I wonder if I just got older or more mature, if the insights I gained during analysis really helped me to change. And I actually went back recently and interviewed my therapist in preparation for today's show. And I asked her, do you think therapy helped me? And she said, frankly, she wasn't sure. But she did say, and I agree with her on this, that she was a stable presence in my life when my family was a little bit in turmoil. Eventually, I went to college and I didn't see any therapists while I was there because I felt very stable. And then out on my own as an artist, trying to begin my career and struggling with relationships, I decided to go back and see another therapist. I chose someone from a psychodynamic approach again, and I struggled to stick with it because I felt very much judged by her. She said the way I stopped and started therapy was pathological. And fortunately, I had a friend who told me that maybe what was pathological was just the fact that I kept going back to the same woman who clearly wasn't helping me. So I decided to try a new approach. I looked into finding a rational emotive behavioral therapist. And that's how I met my first guest today, Bernadette Ainsworth. She is my therapist, and she has helped me to unconditionally accept myself and unconditionally accept others. And she also helped me to realize that one of the activities I was doing as an artist was actually utilizing a technique that Dr. Albert Ellis, the founder of R.E.B.T, had prescribed to people to overcome fear of public humiliation. It's called shame attacking. So I'm going to bring Bernadette on. We're going to talk more about all of that. Just to introduce her a little bit, she has a MSc in rational emotive and cognitive behavioral therapies. She has a background in treating anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder. So without further ado, let's welcome Bernadette Ainsworth. Welcome.
Thank you very much for asking me, Oriana. I feel after that I've got to live up to it now, so I hope I can answer your questions as well as you'd like.
I'm sure you will have no problem answering them. I wanted to mention in the introduction that you were an actress before. So my first question is, why did you decide to move into therapy as a field?
I'd always been interested less in what people do than why they do it, even when I was a kid. And so it was a natural part of being an actress because what people do and why they do it is part of your job as an actor. But then if you're working as a psychotherapist, that's the root of what you're dealing with.
How has being an actress informed your work as a therapist?
I think it's partly the fact that you have an easy access to your emotions, I think, as an actress. You're used to what you've just said about the shame attacking. You're used to the shame of having to feel exposed when you're expressing quite raw emotions. But most of us wouldn't express a lot of the emotions you express as an actress in our everyday life. We might express it in private, but we won't do it in public. And so you develop a real ability to access your emotions honestly and with humility, ideally with humility, as an actress. And as a psychotherapist, I think perhaps we have a faster ability to identify and empathise, at least intellectually, with what people are coming in with as a problem. Also, I think you're more dynamic and creative in your use of the technique. So even though there is a clear technical model with rational emotive behaviour therapy, or R.E.B.T as I will have to say from now on, it's the creative way you use it that makes it really, really ring home with people that you're working with, so that they take away techniques that empower them.
And could you just say a bit more about R.E.B.T and what I was talking about unconditional self-acceptance?
It's refusal to judge yourself according to how you do. So people have got a tendency to rate themselves. And if they rate themselves according to how people think of them, according to how well they do in an exam, or how well they think they are in terms of making money, or whatever their imagined important thing is, then if they fail to make the grade that they're attempting to make, then they will tend to judge themselves harshly. And once they do that, they think of themselves as various themes you'll find come up that become a core part of disturbance for them. And that will be something along the lines of, I'm a failure, I'm completely inadequate, there's something wrong with me, there just is, I'm completely useless, I'm worthless, I'm a waste of time. And so they feed that idea more and more, and it tends to migrate to other problems. So if they fail in a relationship, they think it means they personally are a failure, and not that various elements contributed to the relationship failing. Now, if you have unconditional self-acceptance, and it's not quite as simple as I'm making it sound, you rate your behaviour, but not yourself, based on the idea that none of us is perfect. We're all human, we're all evolving, we're all a work in progress.
Mm-hmm. Could you just say a bit more about shame attacking?
The best example I can think of is in CBT it's seen as exposure and response prevention. So the idea is that you get used to the thing that you're fearful of or uncomfortable about, but because you get used to it, you become pretty indifferent. I call it familiarity breeds contempt, but the idea is shame attacking, that you just develop confidence. So Albert Ellis's example, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was with a man who felt he couldn't get a date. So I think we've done this one before. We did this in therapy as well, didn't we?
Yeah.
And it's worked for you. I see, Oriana, congratulations.
Thanks.
So with this gentleman who couldn't get a date, he was sort of prescribed a behavioural homework of asking, I think it was 100 women on a date, and all of them had to turn him down. So if anybody accepted him, they didn't count. So he had to go through asking 100 women on a date, and then at the end of it, despite the fact that they all turned him down, he didn't think that made him a complete loser. He valued himself accordingly and decided that he's still a worthwhile person no matter how many people don't want to go out with him. That's quite an extreme shame attacking example.
Yeah, to go back to your example about getting a date, I had the opposite problem where I was afraid to be single. I mean, it wasn't that I would stay in a relationship too long. I mean, maybe occasionally I stayed in a relationship too long, but I would jump right back into a new relationship. I rarely had gaps. Before I started seeing you, that was one of the things I did address, and I was able to be single for a whole year because I learned just by doing it that it wasn't as bad, and actually I really enjoyed being single. I learned to really enjoy being single.
Also, one of the things we haven't said is R.E.B.T is based on the principle of emotional responsibility. If there's a negative thing that happens to you, a sort of adverse thing, then it's according to the way you think about it, that's the way that you will be able to react emotionally. So if you have extreme rigid thinking where you perceive a bad thing happening as the worst thing that could ever happen, and you underestimate your ability to cope, and then you sort of start to have a spiralling off of even more so-called bad things that could happen, then you're likely to end up anxious. But if you can address that irrational, rigid way of thinking, which is what we call a demanding way of thinking, with a sort of levelling off way of thinking, then you can see that a bad thing can happen, but you can get the accurate size of how bad it is. And then you start to think in a problem-solving way, so you realise you can cope with it. I mean, after all, we all can cope to a degree. People think they can't, they get too frustrated, they can't cope with something any longer. But if you look at it, we're all sitting here, none of us is disintegrated, we've all coped with whatever adversities come our way this year and in our lives so far. Otherwise we wouldn't be here.
Good point. So why do you think that R.E.B.T has a bad rap and C.B.T has a bad rap with psychodynamic people?
Well, you'd have to ask them. I suspect it's because we put them out of a job. But I think the reason why R.E.B.T and C.B.T are so successful is that we're in a fast society now. So if you spend 7 years in psychoanalysis, you'll get to understand your problems well, you'll get to talk about your emotions, you'll probably enjoy it, but you probably won't have much that's constructive to move on with. You might.
Well,
but you might
we
not.
have two guests coming up who are going to have something to say about that.
But in R.E.B.T you will have them fast, you will have them efficiently, and you'll have them speedily, and you'll be self-empowered not to need to come back to anyone else. And you come from a history of psychoanalysis, psychodynamic, and you finally quit when you came to R.E.B.T. when we got it right. Thank you.
That is the narrative. So thank you very much for that. And I think we're going to take a quick commercial break. After the break, we'll be speaking with a psychodynamic therapist who I'm sure will have a lot to say about what Bernadette was talking about. And she'll also be performing for us, so stay tuned.